And yeah, Air Console is a browser-based platform for local multiplayer games that are controlled by smartphones. So what that means is when you, like as a user, you go to airconsole.com, you with your PC, you then go to airconsole.com with your smartphone, you enter a connect code, which is what you see on this picture here. And then you have your phone connected to the screen and can use it as a controller. The whole thing is entirely web-based, so nobody needs to install anything, and it's completely free for the users. And the way it will be financed is by adding advertisements after games, but that is only like getting implemented right now. We've launched in last September, so we've been online for 7 months. When we started, we had 6 titles in our store that people could play. And right now we have 29, so we've been growing pretty fast. I'm quickly gonna check if there's any, okay, no comments yet, good. So I guess you guys can all hear me and see my screen. All right. Good, so this is my current project, just to give you a quick impression of what I do. It's a minigame collection that's somewhat inspired by the Mario Party games, if you guys have played these. It's for 1 to 8 players. There's currently 3 minigames in it, but we will add more in the months to come. We just released an initial version of it last Thursday, so 2 days ago. And it was made by 2 people. The entire Air Console team is 5 people, but 2 of us were working on this. Yeah, let's get started. So for a developer, what Air Console, or what like the platform is, or what a game is to be precise, is just 2 HTML files basically. So what happens on the big screen, so on the computer, is an HTML file and the controller as well. Now, for us Unity developers, of course, if we want to make our game HTML file, we're going to use WebGL. And to make that work with Air Console, we use we've developed an Air Console plugin that developers can implement into their project that they can use to handle everything. And if a game is built from Unity using the plugin with WebGL, it can then be uploaded to Air Console, where you can where it's then playable using the smartphone. The controller itself is also an HTML file, and that is also true when you build it with Unity. So the controller is actually written in HTML and not like exported from Unity. It's not a WebGL build or anything. It's just a file. So the functionalities that we want on the controller, we have to write using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. For Unity developers that don't have any web developing experience, Air Console offers a controller generator where you can like place buttons and the code is generated automatically. So if somebody doesn't know a lot of web development, they can still make an Air Console game, because like the main programming is done in Unity, and there's this controller generator. Alternatively, when somebody wouldn't want to work with Unity, games can also be made in just HTML5 using JavaScript, or we also have a plugin for the Construct 2 game engine. Now, obviously, I'm going to focus on the Unity part in this presentation, but yeah, just FYI. Now, the basic, the most important part of using your smartphone as your controller for a game that is happening on screen is, of course, sending messages from the smartphone to the screen and the other way around. So how does that work? The code snippets that you see on screen here are how I, as a developer, or you as a potential developer for Air Console, would send messages. On the left, you can see the code of a script that is using the Air Console plugin script. So in the awake event, we register a custom event that is called onMessage. And we then receive this as soon as the smartphone sends it, and can log it or can do whatever we want with it. So in this example here on the right, you can see the script from the controller. So that is the HTML file, that is the controller, whereas the left side is my C# script that I'm using in Unity. And on the right, you can see that if this button is pressed, I send the message jump. So what happens here is like this function is called that is defined up here. And in this sense, like using Air Console, it sends the message to the screen. And then, of course, in my onMessage event on the screen in C#, I can define what happens when this controller sends jump. I'm probably going to move a character, like make the character jump or something. That's the general idea of it. It goes the other way around too, of course. So I just noticed I used inconsistent examples here, but you'll get it. In C#, I'm using the send a message function. I'm using Air Console send message, and I'm sending this to the first controller. Controllers have device IDs, so that every smartphone that joins gets an own ID, which I can use to send messages to that phone in particular, so that not every phone has the same info maybe, or I need to distinguish, of course, like which phone is sending me messages, so I can move the appropriate character or whatever. And this way around, like I send a message to the controller, and here in the JavaScript on the controller, I receive this message and I log it, or here I check if this data is jumped, then I can make the character jump, or that something like that at least. It's just example scripts, of course. If you want like working examples of Air Console scripts, both in C# and in JS HTML, you should download the Unity plugin, the Air Console plugin from the Unity Asset Store, because in there we have working examples with all the functions that are available in the plugin, and so there's like no need to screenshot these scripts because they're just examples. Okay, then this is sort of behind the scenes how it works. What you see on the left is a script, or a snippet from the script that is like the plugin itself. And I personally did not write this, so I realize it's using like these external calls to talk to the phone, sort of. If you want to see how that works, I also recommend downloading the plugin and just having a look at the code, because I cannot really go into detail. I didn't write this. I only started working with JS and HTML like when I started to work for Air Console, and that hasn't been that long. If you have any questions about how this works in detail, you can send them to me and I will forward them to the developer of the plugin. I will quickly check the chat if there's anything. Okay, no new messages, good. All right. Oops. Latency. It's like a very common reaction for when we tell people about Air Console. When we say, like, explain what it is, people say something like, yeah, but wouldn't work because latency is too much, so you can only make like very simple games or whatever. We're experiencing actually very low latency numbers. I'm assuming everybody knows what the term latency means. It means like how long does it take for a message from the phone to arrive on the screen and the other way around. So like how much input lag do we have because we need to send the message over a server. We distinguish between WebRTC and non-WebRTC. Currently, most Android devices have WebRTC, which is like a faster way to communicate between phone and screen, because they don't have to, the message doesn't have to make a round trip over our server, basically. And most Android phones have WebRTC. Most iOS doesn't at the moment. It might be added soon, but we don't really know yet. But so this is sort of the numbers that we have to calculate with. It's about 80 to 120 milliseconds of latency. And that's not a lot. That's like 0.1 second, of course, but depending on your gameplay, it can be very noticeable. So in most cases, we have to keep that in mind and work with it or work around it. And what is also important to note, of course, is that this latency will not be the same for everybody. That means it depends on where in the world you are, how far are you from our nearest server, what's your internet connection, and all that sort of thing. And even with the same internet connection and in the same place, you will have variation in latency. So you cannot just ask for the latency at the beginning of a game and then use that. You have to check it with every input. Yeah. We have a latency debugger that developers can use where they can check how much latency they have. So it's easier to to work with and to know what you're dealing with. So to find out what the current latency is, like if I have a game and I receive the input jump from a player and I want to know how much delay was in that input, because I need to sort of calculate that into my gameplay or my game logic. So what I do is this. The top part, with the black background again, is from the JS of the controller. This first part here is just that it's a swipe pad, meaning it's not a button but swiping on the phone. So if the player swipes up, I send a message containing like two key value pairs. The first key value pair is key action value jump, and the second one is TS for timestamp, and as a value, it sends the server time. That's the top part where the arrow points at. So what I do here is, first, I send this value. Okay, this is jumping. What I want to do is jumping, and I want to do it at this specific point. So we're using synchronized clocks. That means like the phones and the server, or just the server knows the exact time, and the phone here is asking for the server time. Then on message, that the part below the script with the white background is C# again in Unity. And when I receive this message, I check. First of all, I check if is this action jump or is it another action that I sent. I also check if it's from a valid player number and not some device that just joined and isn't actually in the game. And then I compare the timestamp that I got with the current server time. So then I know how much latency the input has, because I know, okay, this input was sent at this and that time, and I can compare it, and now is that time, so the difference between those is my latency. And then according to that, like if I know, okay, I have 0.1 seconds or 0.234 seconds, whatever, based on that, I can then make some adjustments to my gameplay, because I know that this input was actually sent earlier than when I received it. Now, how do we use that? I'm going to show you a quick example from a game of ours that is called Air Shields. You see an animation of it on the side. You see that players shoot these missiles into this or onto the circle, and shooting one of those from the moment the player taps until it arrives always takes 0.5 seconds. So if the screen receives a message saying shoot and timestamp 0.2 seconds ago, that means the screen can then spawn a missile a little bit ahead to compensate for the latency. I'm not sure if that is clear, so I'm quickly going to check the chat if there's any question about this particular issue. Did you get what that was about? Like adjusting the input so that it compensate the latency. No question, so I guess everything's fine. Can you go over again? That makes sense. Please provide more details. All right, I'll try to make it a bit more clear. So it's important to know when a message was sent. The moment when I tap on the phone, I send the exact time at that moment. And when I receive it, I compare it to the time that is now. And that gives me how long it took for the message to arrive. And I can then pretend as if the message arrived earlier. So I can spawn my missile. When I get the input jump at timestamp 0, and then I receive the message, but I compare it with the current time, and current time is like 0.2, whatever, then I can spawn the missile a little ahead. So so the player doesn't notice, because to the player it will always feel the same regardless of their latency, because the time between the player tapping the screen and the missile reaching its goal will always be the same. I hope that's clearer now. I'm not going to go over it again. If you still have questions, maybe save them for later. I can also point you to some explanations on it online. In other games, we also use a similar we use similar methods to, for example, in one of our games, we scale animations. So animations are shorter when there was more latency, so that the time between giving input and the animation being over is always the same. And that really helps the player. It may sound sort of unimportant, but it's really noticeable if you don't do it. And of course, even though we use tricks like these, there will always be certain limitations. Like, for example, it will probably be hard to do a precise platformer on your console because of the latency that we have, and because it's not always possible to do this backwards calculation of what would have happened in the game had this message arrived 0.2 seconds ago. All right, next point, controller views. Of course, when we have a controller and there's buttons on it or spaces where you can swipe, that always is dependent on the situation in the game. So what you see here is 3 different controller views from our game Silly Run Valley, which is a endless runner game where you have to swipe up to jump and down to like slide under obstacles, and so have to run as far as you can. And the 3 different views you see here is, like, on the left you see the in-game screen with the instruction to swipe, to jump and duck. The center one is the character selection, where you can swipe left, right, up and down to choose a character and press the ready button when you're done. And the third one is sort of a special situation in-game when you're holding a bomb, where you can then swipe left and right or shake the controller. And it's important to have these different views because they give the player information on what's currently going on in the game. And of course, they're also, like, we couldn't fit all of this information in one screen, so it makes a lot more sense to not show the controller on the in-game screen, because there we have more important things to convey, maybe, or something like that. Or we don't show a certain button when the game is not in a situation where you shouldn't use it. And how do we do that? We are, like, most of our games are currently using a view manager, and what this does is just show different parts of the HTML file in different situations. So the HTML file that I have of my controller, where everything is defined, where I have like where I design buttons and these swipe pads or whatever. It's all divided into div containers, and these have like view IDs, so I can show different divs depending on the situation in game. Now, of course, to show these situations, I need to let the controller know that a certain situation, like what situation the game is currently in. So to go back to the example of Silly Run Valley, I need the controller to know, okay, right now is character selection time, so you need to show this. Or I need to know, okay, right now is in-game time, so you need to show this. And the way I do this is by setting a device state. Device states can be used by from all devices, so both the screen can set a device state and every controller can set a device state. And for this particular example, the screen sets a device state, and a device state is basically a lot of key value pairs. So what you see here is a such a device state, as I'm using them as a debug in Unity. So I have like my first key is seen, and the value of that is another key value pair, another list of key value pairs, another dictionary, so to speak. And it gets rather complex pretty quickly. So my first key is ID, and then my first key is scene, and then I can go into the scene info to check, okay, the ID of that is in-game character selection or whatever. And I have additional info for the players, like which players are ready or which players have chosen which characters. That's all sort of the information that is in here. And then in the controller, that new code snippet is showing the controller again. I ask, okay, I just got a device state change from the screen, so I'm gonna check. Does this device state have a key seen? If so, does it have an ID? If so, is that ID character selection or Silly Run Valley or whatever it should be? And then based on that, I use my view manager here to show which view should currently be shown. And yeah, that's sort of like, maybe that's already going into a bit too much detail, but it's sort of important to know because it also shows you a bit that you can do a lot of complex stuff in Air Console, and to you shouldn't, like as a developer, should you decide to make something for Air Console, you wouldn't have to limit yourself to a single controller view. You wouldn't have to limit yourself to any of that kind. Yeah. Just a second. All right. Then I'm gonna take a moment to talk about controller design. And by design, I mean, yeah, just what is seen on the controller in terms of how many buttons or how much info is conveyed on the controller. And it's actually sort of at the beginning, when we showed Air Console to people who didn't know about it, a very common reaction was something like, but why would I want to use my phone as a controller? That sucks. And what people often have in mind is when you try to use small buttons on the controller, like for example, when you try to emulate a regular controller, a regular gamepad, and you display a D-pad or a joystick on the controller screen, and then think the player can use that just as well as he could use a regular gamepad, that doesn't really work because of the lack of tactile feedback. So in for a regular controller, I always feel where my fingers at and if they're on the buttons or not. But when I use a touch screen, that doesn't work. So that sort of limits us, but it also gives us other options, because what we don't want to do for Air Console is use a lot of tiny buttons which the players can't see. Because if we do that, they're constantly confused and don't know where to press. So that's why I sort of listed these do's and don'ts. It's sort of what we've gathered in experience over the past couple of months of making games for Air Console. What works really well is using smartphone-specific stuff. So things that a regular gamepad couldn't, like swiping, shaking, the gyroscope, the accelerometer. That gives us a lot of options already. That gives us plenty of things to control the game with. But of course, it needs to be thought of at the beginning. We cannot. It's not a good idea probably to design a game and then try to port it to Air Console. Some will work, of course. Some will work very well, but for a lot of game mechanics, you need to plan it from the beginning. It's a good idea to use pretty big buttons. Again, for the reason that you place your thumbs on the phone once, and if you then find everything blindly, that's okay. But what you don't want the players to have to look down from their action game to press a button because they don't feel where it is. And you can use the controller, of course, to convey info, because since it's a screen as well and not just a gamepad, you can have specific info on there. So, for example, you can use it for something as simple as you are this character, or you are the blue player. But you can also use it for information that is maybe secret from the other players. We have one game that is called Simoria that it works a little bit like Werewolf, where you play it with a group of people, and part of the group are sort of the evil guys, or but they do that in secret. So the players see on their own phone which faction they belong to, and need to keep that secret from the other players, which is of course something that you could not do with a traditional gamepad. You cannot use a gamepad like an Xbox 360 controller or whatever. You cannot use that to communicate that sort of information. And the blog post that I linked here is a write-up of these controller design do's and don'ts that I published on the Air Console blog. So should you plan to do something for Air Console, or should you be interested in what it takes to design a good controller, you can have a look at that. The don'ts is basically, I already explained it above. It's just small buttons as well as D-pads and joysticks don't really work in our experience. All right, and that's about it, I guess. I have included a couple of maybe useful links for you guys here. The developers page here, the second link, is pretty important in case you want to know more about Air Console and how it works. Of course, the Unity plugin, which is free to download, and you can just try it if you like. Our social media, where you can find us if you want to keep being updated about what we do and about new games that are released. Thank you all for listening. I hope you sort of understood what I was talking about. I felt like I was talking a bit too fast and was a bit nervous. I added my email address and Twitter handle, so if you want to stay in touch or have further questions or just want to follow me on Twitter or whatever, you have those now. And I'll get to the chat in a minute. I still have one-on-one slots available, like these interview thingies. So if you want to know more about Air Console or developing for smartphone controllers, you can still sign up for a slot. I have slots right after. I have one slot open right after this talk at about 8, and I can also take some time on Tuesday and Wednesday. But I think you see that all in the schedule. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. All right, good. Blog post URL, please. I see in the chat. Amazing talk. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah, the blog URL, I'm gonna post it in the chat. But you can also find the exact blog post that I talked about. I'm not gonna search it again right now, but you can find it in the slides, which will be made available to you. And I will also share them on Twitter. Okay, I'm quickly gonna look through the questions. Somebody said, on previous project, we called this the anti-lag rewind. The server goes back in time to perform the player's action. Yeah, that is basically what we do. From slide 17, yeah, that's a blog post that I posted. Okay. How does the game... Ooh, sorry, too many questions. Somebody asks, how does the game submission work outside of contests? Can anybody submit games? So what they mean by contest here is we had a couple game developer contests where we offered prize money and would let developers submit games. We will probably do that again at some point. But yes, absolutely, you can submit outside of games, outside of contests, sorry. And we are working on adding the monetization at the moment, so that when you add a game, you can actually make money off of it, hopefully. And so yeah, there should be, like, as soon as we have the monetization in, there will also be more incentive for developers to add their games, even if there's no prize money involved. But if we launch another contest and your game is already online, we can still take it into consideration as long as it wasn't participating in the last contest. I hope that answers your question. I'm going to move on to the next one. Have you considered making a lighter messaging protocol rather than JSON over HTTP to improve latency? I'm thinking something that packs byte data over just a raw socket connection, for example. I got to be honest and say that is not really my expertise here. I cannot answer the question because I'm not the one that writes the actual platform itself. I just work with Unity, work with the plugins. So for an answer to that question, maybe put it in an email and send it to me, and I will forward it to the people who could answer that. Then next question, to quickly go back to the latency issue you were talking about, were you saying the game will show the output at 0.5 seconds, regardless if the actual input is faster? Not really. Think about how to best explain that. So we sort of want our games to have a bit of, like, games need to be able to accommodate for a bit of latency. That's why I said not all games would be a perfect fit for Air Console, because some just work too fast or are too precise and cannot account for that latency. What I meant was that when I'm assuming you're talking about the part where I said that the moment for the input to arrive, for the input to be given until the action being executed, that is always the same time. Oh, sorry, somebody's just clarified. Example, if the missile is supposed to take 500 milliseconds to arrive, but the input comes in 100 milliseconds late, then the animation is shortened to 400 milliseconds. Yeah, that's exactly the thing. That's pretty much exactly what I was going to say. Thank you. Does that answer your question, P? Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah, please ask away. Still have time for more questions. I think, or did I miss something? I think I didn't, but I'll quickly check the chat again. Oops. Anything else? Have you played a game that does a virtual gamepad on a touch screen that you liked? For me, they never end up feeling quite right. I think there's an important distinction to be made here, and that is, like, I've played, what was it, Final Fantasy V on my iPhone, and that uses sort of like a virtual joystick. And that is okay, but the important distinction is that there, I'm always looking at my phone screen, and I always see where my fingers are, because I'm like constantly looking down and I see my fingers. But for Air Console, I don't. I look on the big screen, and I want to use my gamepad blindly, and that is why it's like especially, it's just different, and therefore no, I don't think it will. I don't think it works quite as well. I'd love to be proven wrong on that matter. I'd love for somebody to develop a game that actually does it really well, and I have to apologize to everybody that I didn't believe in it. But no, I haven't seen a like virtual gamepad that feels quite right either. No. Maybe some detail until we get the next questions. Some people ask about maximum player numbers. And the cool thing is Air Console as a platform actually allows about up to maybe 3,000 players. We haven't really tested it with that many, but it's a very high maximal player number that you can technically make games for, which of course is really cool and something that no other console has. Okay, new question. Can the user sign into a dev service when the game starts? Say they have their own portal where they want users to log into before playing the game on Air Console. Not really. We don't really want to limit. We don't really want users to have to go through a login, an additional one. Like for Air Console, accessibility is really important, and we want the games to be playable really fast. So people don't even have to download an app. They just have to go to the browser, just enter the code. And it's not really our plan to put that behind a further login. Like we do ask for email addresses after a game was played, but I don't think that what you're asking for is possible. But again, I'm not the main developer of the platform, so if you how to get player data. Sorry. Okay, I was just wondering how to get player data, I guess. We can provide you with some player data. Like we do have some like Air Console analytics that we share with developers. For example, how many players are in a game per average, how long is a session, how many players do you have, that sort of thing you can see in the Air Console insights. Has Air Console done VR games like with gear? No, we have not. I don't know if that would work. I don't know if you can do a mobile website, or like if you can use VR with a mobile website, but you might be able to. Try it. We haven't. Somebody asks, how many have been developed so far? You mean how many games, right? We currently have 29 games in the store. Games that have been worked on are a lot more, like probably about 40, 50. Not all of those were finished. Some were just prototypes. Some had to, like we had a couple submissions for our first game contest where the submission wasn't quite ready to be published, and we wrote the devs our feedback, but they didn't get back to us. So obviously there's a couple of games that have been made, but developers didn't have time or didn't feel like continuing it after the contest. So there's a lot of half-developed games, but about 30 completed ones. And of those 30, I think about maybe 15 or so are our own games, like games developed by the core Air Console team. And the rest is from external developers. All right, I have about 8 more minutes of question time. Can you have drastically different UI on different player phones for an asymmetrical experience? Yes, that is absolutely possible, and I would strongly encourage doing that because I think it's a super cool idea and very few people have done it so far. You can show every player a completely different UI, and you can divide them into teams, you can give them completely different options. It's everything possible, and if you feel like doing something like that, absolutely do. I think that would be a really cool idea. I would want to make something like that myself, but me and my colleague have sort of been busy with this with the other project. This sounds so awesome. Thank you for your talk. I'm very glad that people like it. And I hope some of you will look at the Air Console API or the plugin and maybe even make a game. Who knows? It's got a lot of potential. Like even with the 30 games that we have, there's still. I could give you a ton of ideas, like game ideas that I think would be really cool, but I don't have time to implement. Well, I guess every developer can name 10 ideas that they would like to do. So all the games are free currently. Yes, and they will remain free. That is one of the, I mentioned it before that accessibility is very important for Air Console. And we don't want to put that behind a paywall. We don't want users to have to log in or pay for the games. So yes, they will absolutely remain free. And the only thing that we will add is advertisements because we need to pay wages somehow, and there might be a subscription to don't get ads. So that might be what users can pay, but they can also just watch ads if they don't want to pay. Can end users pick their controller format? I'm not sure what you mean. Like the developer defines what is visible on the controller. Maybe you can clarify your question. In the meantime, somebody asked for Apple TV integration. We tried that, and if I remember correctly, there was a problem where you can't use a browser on Apple TV or something. Our tech lead tried it, and actually we would have loved to get it work on Apple TV, but apparently it's like just not possible with the way Apple TV works currently. We do have Android TV and Samsung TV apps though. Okay, somebody clarified their question. Virtual D-pad for those who like it, tilt phone interface for those who prefer that. You could do that as a developer. That would be like if you make a game, you can give the user that option. But I would recommend just like testing it with a couple people and then choosing the one that works better. But you can give the option. That's possible. You can just give a like selection dialog, choose controls. I think we have that in one of our games. We have a Bomberman style game that is called Tic Tac Boom, and that there you can choose which kind of input you want to use. Have you tested on Wii U or any consoles that do have browsers? Yes, at some point. The problem with those browsers is that they're really, really, really slow. And so our Unity games usually don't work. We are also not quite there with having Unity games work on Android TV for the same reason, because those browsers are always a bit like when you run something via the browser, you can't quite use the whole hardware as if it were an app for it. So yes, we have tested on consoles. It's technically possible to play Air Console on your PlayStation, but we're not really optimizing for it at the moment. So it's not the best experience. I hope that answers your question. It's not a priority at the moment for us because, like I said, we're a really small team and we have a lot of stuff that we want to do. All right, I have about 3 more minutes of question time, in case any of you can think of something to ask. Thank you. Thank you too. Very interesting talk. Thanks. What's your favorite game on the platform? My own, of course. No, I have two favorites, I think. One of them is actually the one that we just released because I'm super happy that the release went really well, and that's the Mario Party-like game collection that I mentioned before. It's called Silly World Series, and we actually made a Let's Play of that, like from the Air Console team, and that was a ton of fun. Like playing it with a couple people is just it's really cool. We were just 5 people, and you could play it with 8, so that was really fun. I have to try it with 8 some point. And my other favorite game is it's called Castle Hustle, and that was developed by a student at the Zurich University of the Arts, which is where I studied too and graduated about a year ago. And they made this game as a semester project. And what's your best score at Creek for speed? I guess about 300 meters, but I'm not 100% sure. And Castle Hustle was made in just a couple of months by game design students, and they plan to still develop it. And the cool thing about it is it's for 2 to 5 players, it's co-op, and you have to plan your moves. Like it's sort of, it's got grid-based movement, and you have to defend your castle from monsters. And you always have to plan 4 moves, and then when everybody's planned their moves, they all get executed in like at the same time, or well, just like 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you really have to communicate with your team, like with your fellow players. You have to say, okay, so on turn 3, can you catch that? Because I'm going to throw you a barrel, and then you can throw it at the monster. And that's just really cool because we have very little co-op games so far. We have mostly player versus player. So that is one of my favorite games, definitely. Got another question. How are you promoting? You mean like in terms of what marketing we do for the platform ourselves? Or, okay. Very little, to be honest. So far we've mostly relied on organic growth. So we've been in a couple of tech news outlets. Like we've been on TechCrunch and on the Next Web, and that's mostly due to Raphael, who is responsible for product management and marketing on the team. And he writes to a lot of journalists and tells them, hey, we're doing this cool thing. Would you like to write about it? We were then on the front page of Reddit once, which obviously also brought a lot of users. But actually we're only just now sort of getting into actually doing marketing, because so far we've been very focused on getting games and providing like the best possible experience for the user, so that we can provide a good experience for the users that do come to the platform. So in terms of promotions that are planned, one of the next things that's going to be released is a video that it's just like a promotional video, a trailer, so to speak, of like explaining what Air Console is and why people should totally use it because it's awesome. That's going to be the next bigger promotional thing that we release. I hope that answers your question. All right. So it's about 10 to 8. I think I should be going so that you guys have time to go to the next conferences. In case any more questions should come up, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll say it again. My email is alice@n-dream.com. I will share the slides. If you have any questions, send me an email, write me on Twitter, whatever. Yeah, okay. In that case, thanks to you all for listening. If you want to know more, there's still one-on-one interviews available. If you have like very specific questions that you didn't want to post in the chat. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for all your questions and your interest. Goodbye.